I'm back. We're going to do more jazz reading. Today we've got Bessie Smith by Chris Albertson. Like I said in the last video, if I mispronounce something, please forgive me. And as I learned from the last video, there will probably be cat antics. I've got, probably can't see it, but I've got a stool here for the cats to jump up on if they need attention, which they seem to need a lot of when I'm talking to something that's not them. And yeah, so okay, we've got Bessie Smith. In the years after World War I, the burgeoning record industry's catalogs were dominated by operatic arias, warhorse overtures, Sousa marches, and foreign language series, a euphemism for ethnic music. Oddly enough, considering that they would become the dominant influence on American music, black people did not figure into record company marketing plans, neither as customers nor artists, until 1920. That's when Perry Bradford, a black songwriter, finally persuaded Fred Hager of OK Records to record a vaudeville singer named Mamie Smith. Her first release, That Thing Called Love, sold well beyond Hager's expectations, so he authorized another session. Bradford had Ms. Smith singing Harlem Blues, a tune from a 1918 revue, Made in Harlem, but changed the title to Crazy Blues. It was an even bigger success, and it started the blues craze of the 20s. By early 1923, the major labels were scouting for blues-singing ladies for their newly established race records divisions. Talent scouts tapped the vaudeville and minstrel shows and came up with singers who easily slipped into a blues repertoire. With few exceptions, most notably Gertrude Ma Rainey, these were not dedicated blues artists, but rather so-called sweet singers, eager to jump on the bandwagon. Many of them exhibited minimal talent and are remembered today only for the high caliber of their record instrumental accompaniments. Others, Ida Cox and Clara Smith among them, made a natural transition to blues, but one singer towered above the rest. Bessie Smith's powerful voice and superbly timed delivery easily triumphed over the poorest of accompaniments. Come here, Miles. Okay, yeah, now I got a cat who wants attention. But he's... Come here. There he is. Troops of dancers, musicians, and comedians regularly crisscrossed... Whoops, skipped a whole paragraph. Just kidding, we'll get to that. Bessie was born on Charles Street at the foot of Cameron Hill in the area of Chattanooga, Tennessee, known as Blue Goose Hollow. The date was April 15, the year probably 1894, as noted on a 1923 marriage certificate. At first, she shared a little ramshackle cabin with her parents, 2 brothers, 3 sisters, and 2 nephews. But the children were orphaned while she was an infant, and the task of keeping the family afloat was left to Viola, the oldest sister, who took in laundry. Clarence, the oldest brother, helped out by performing odd jobs in the neighborhood, but his focus was elsewhere. Extroverted and a comedian by nature, he had his sights set on show business. Troops of dancers, musicians, and comedians regularly crisscrossed the South, pitching their tents or renting storefronts from which to offer eager audiences momentary relief from daily drudgery. Like Clarence, many young African Americans saw in these itinerant productions a permanent escape, a stepping stone to a better life. He seized such an opportunity in 1904 by taking to the road with a minstrel show. This left Viola to work things out in reduced circumstances, but Clarence vowed to improve them on his return. During her big brother's 8-year absence, Bessie, who shared his aspirations, began dancing and singing in the streets to the guitar accompaniments of another brother, Andrew. In 1974, Will Johnson, a friend of Andrew's, recalled seeing the sibling duo in front of the White Elephant, a saloon on the corner of 13th and Elm Streets, not far from the apartment to which Viola had moved the family. Now a spirited teenager, Bessie had a little act going. Whenever someone threw a fat coin her way, Johnson recalled, she'd say something like, "That's right, Charlie, give to the church." I always thought she had more talent as a performer, dancing and clowning, than as a singer. At least in those days, I don't remember being particularly impressed with her voice. She sure knew how to shake money loose from her pocket, though. Bessie was ready to join Clarence in 1912 when he returned to Chattanooga with the Moses Stokes troupe. Much to Viola's chagrin, she auditioned successfully for the show's managers, Lonnie and Cora Fisher, who hired her as a dancer because they already had a singer, Gertrude Ma Rainey. For many years, it was thought that Rainey launched Bessie's career and taught her how to sing. One writer's vivid imagination included a kidnapping scenario wherein a kicking, screaming 11-year-old Bessie is dumped at Rainey's feet in a burlap bag. But Bessie hardly needed to be taken out of Chattanooga by force. And we've got a nice, cool picture. Caption reads, Bessie Smith, 1928, courtesy Frank Driggs Collection. Okay. By all accounts, Bessie was already an engaging singer when she left Chattanooga. Actor Lee Whipper, who saw her perform in Atlanta in 1913, said that Ma Rainey may have taught her a few dance steps or showed her how to walk on stage, but Bessie was born with that voice and she had a style of her own. She obviously didn't know she was the artist she was. She didn't know how to dress. She just sang in her street clothes, but she was such a natural that she could wreck anybody's show. Thomas A. Dorsey, who was Ma Rainey's accompanist around that time, agreed that Bessie's singing talent was a self-developed natural gift. He pointed out that even after Bessie became a star, Rainey never took credit for helping her. Between 1913 and 1921, Bessie successfully established herself with black audiences in the South, along the East Coast, and as far west as Muskogee, Oklahoma. With Atlanta's 81 Theater as her home base, she first toured as a lowly chorine with various companies, including Pete Worley's Florida Blossoms and the popular Silas Green shows. Eventually, her magnetic personality and commanding presence had her headlining her own shows at the Atlanta's 91 Theater, which singer May Wright described as a smaller and rougher theater. Details of Bessie's activities during this period are scant, but we do know that she and Hazel Green worked as a team at Baltimore's Douglas Gilmore Theater in 1918, advertised as Hip Ha Girls. Unconfirmed rumors suggested that she was a widow, having married a soldier, Earl Love, who became a casualty in World War I. Come here. By 1921, Bessie was living in Philadelphia. We like Philly. Where she frequently enjoyed prominent billing at the Standard Theater. An ad in the September 14th, 1921 issue of the Philadelphia Tribune contains the enigmatic line, "Hits on Columbia Records and her 5 jazz-away dandies." But there is no tangible evidence of Bessie having recorded for any label before February 1923, when Frank Walker, the director of Columbia's new race division, sent for her. She had, however, previously made an unsuccessful audition for Thomas Edison, who noted Voice NG in his log, and for OK's Fred Hager, who had approved Mamie Smith's Milestones session, but deemed Bessie's voice too rough. There was also a small item in the Chicago Defender's February 12, 1921 issue announcing that Bessie, the greatest of all blues singers, was presently making records with the aid of 6 jazz musicians for the Emerson Record Company, and that the initial release could be expected around March 10th. Again, there is no proof of such recordings taking place, but it is interesting to note that Bessie was referred to as the greatest blues singer 2 years before making her known record debut with the Columbia coupling Gulf Coast Blues and Downhearted Blues. On June 7, 1923, As the record shipped to dealers, Bessie married Jack G., a Philadelphia night watchman whom she had met the year before. Their relationship soon became a case study in mutual spousal abuse. That's exciting. Jack was keenly interested in the money that show business generated, but he never accepted the lifestyle that accompanied it. She was a strong woman with a beautiful, strong constitution, recalled Jack's niece Ruby Walker, who toured with Bessie for 14 years, and she loved a good time. To Bessie, that usually meant high consumption of moonshine, heavy partying, and pleasures of the flesh. Man or woman, she loved them young, said Ruby, but I didn't let her get to my men, although she tried a couple of times. Bessie's ribald asides always took place on the road in Jack's absence and promptly ended with his return. When Jack was around, you couldn't get Bessie to take a drink. She was no fun then, and she didn't want to hear about the good times we had when he was away. When she initially hit the road as an executive Columbia artist, Bessie's shows were modest presentations that mainly had her performing to piano accompaniments. That changed when Downhearted Blues sold a staggering 780,000 copies in the first 6 months, and theater owners began reporting record ticket sales. Now Bessie's shows became ambitious productions with splashy costumes, elaborate headgear, a chorus line, comedians, props, and a full band. The press named her Queen of the Blues, which Columbia upgraded to Empress. A heavy show schedule had her spending a good part of each summer touring the South under canvas, and the winter months headlining in theaters on the Black-owned Theater Owners Booking Association circuit, whose contract for $2,000 per week eventually made her the highest-paid black entertainer of her day. She was now regularly sending money to Viola, there we go, and Clarence joined the show as a comedian, master of ceremonies, and business manager. In the latter capacity, he ordered a private railroad car custom-built for the troupe in 1925. It accommodated 40 people in relative comfort, with room for the tent's long center pole, canvas, props, and souvenir merchandise. The car also served to lodge the cast in towns where hotels were for whites only. Ma Rainey had her own bus, but Bessie's railroad coach, with her name emblazoned in big letters on both sides, was a grander sign of arrival. Although sales of her subsequent releases never matched Downhearted Blues, Bessie continued to outsell most other artists, and Columbia renewed her contract each year. Throughout the 20s, she regularly took time out from her tours to record in New York. Her payment went from a flat fee of $125 to $200 per issued side, with no royalties, which meant that healthy record sales did not directly fatten Bessie's bank account, but they were valuable promotional tools that brought thousands of people to her live performances. A February 25, 1924 appearance at Cincinnati's Roosevelt Theater included 20 minutes in full ovation and bows, according to the Chicago Defender. 3 weeks later, when Smith fans caused a near riot outside of Pittsburgh's Lincoln Theater, the Courier reported, early in the evening, crowds started to gather, and by 7 o'clock in the evening, the streetcar traffic was blocked. Thousands of people were turned away, and those who did not attend stormed the theater. Bessie's majestic voice made most of her contemporaries sound gauzy by comparison, but there was more to her artistry than a powerful voice. She rendered her songs a mesmerizing honesty, which most people saw as a reflection of her offstage persona. She sang from the heart, said Ruby. She was very real. You knew that no matter what she sang about, she'd been there. She also had an innate aesthetic sense that dictated perfect timing and magnificent control. Others have noted her subtle movements, a slight shift of the hips, a raised eyebrow, a naughty smile. Recalling a 1925 Thanksgiving weekend performance in Newark, New Jersey at the Orpheum Theater, titled Memories of Bessie Smith, Jazz Records, September 1947, writer-photographer Carl Van Vechen, an ardent admirer, noted the powerfully magnetic personality of this elemental conjure woman with her plangent African voice, recalled how the audience burst into hysterical, semi-religious shrieks of sorrow and lamentations, and added that amens rent the air. Danny Barker and Zutty Singleton made similar observations, likening Bessie to a preacher whose audience displayed church-like emotions when she sang. Band leader Cy Oliver witnessed Bessie hypnotize and walk a fan during a Baltimore appearance. Ooh. You saying hi, Miles? Those who experienced her... Oh my god, okay. Those who experienced her on stage have been quick to point out that Bessie was a versatile entertainer and that singing was but a part of her act, albeit the most memorable. Often Bessie's songs were defiant declarations of independence that a feminist movement of a much later era could embrace. While her recordings do not capture Bessie's commanding stage presence, hey baby, and ability to interact with an audience, they give us a good idea of her vocal power, authoritative delivery, and ability to transcend woefully... Miles. There we go. The ability to transcend woefully imperfect musical environments. Indeed, the woman who has been called the world's greatest blues singer sometimes suffered the world's worst accompaniments, but she also recorded with some of history's finest jazz musicians, including 9 titles with Louis Armstrong and 16 with James P. Johnson on St. Louis Blues and Reckless Blues. From January 14th, 1925 date, Armstrong's cornet becomes a second voice, perfectly interacting with Bessie's superbly paced, intensely personal delivery of the lyrics. Supporting these masterful duets is Fred Longshaw's plaintive harmonium, an unusual instrument in this context, but one that here seems perfectly natural. Of the 11 pianists with whom Bessie recorded, James P. Johnson was her favorite, the only one whose playing could match her vocal nuances. Like Armstrong, he went beyond mere accompaniment, weaving rich musical texture into Bessie's words on a lusty number like Lock and Key, providing an impressionistic complement to her urgency on Backwater Blues, her best-known composition. Another Smith favorite was trombonist Big Charlie Green, a Fletcher Henderson sideman who... cat hair. A Fletcher Henderson sideman who evidenced a remarkable rapport with Bessie on numerous sides, most strikingly a 1928 two-part recording of Empty Bed Blues. Bessie delivers this humorous tale with exquisite timing, savoring each double entendre as Green's jaunty trombone comments and turns the performance into a masterful interchange that effectively contrasts Porter Granger's almost linear piano accompaniment. As the 20s drew to an end, Bessie's married life was on a roller coaster course. Her binges became more frequent as Jack spent less time on the road with her. He now knew of his wife's bisexuality, having caught her in a compromising situation with a chorine, but Bessie calmed his rage by appealing to his materialism. She lavished him with expensive gifts, but none proved as effective as her naming him the manager of her show, a purely conciliatory gesture that eventually backfired. By 1928, the blues craze that swept Bessie to stardom had ebbed, and the TBOA circuit was experiencing economic difficulties. Because Bessie's last show, Mississippi Days, had done quite well, the TBOA contacted Jack and, unaware that he was manager in name only, ordered 2 shows for the upcoming season. Delighted, Bessie agreed to give him $3,000 for production costs, although Clarence, the troupe's de facto manager, warned her against leaving such a task in Jack's inexperienced hands. "She should have listened to him," said Clarence's wife Maud in a 1971 interview, but Bessie could be very stubborn, and back in those days she would just do anything to keep Jack happy. It was actually too late. for Jack G was already involved in an amorous liaison with Gertrude Saunders, a glamorous-looking sweet singer, who had starred in the original production of Shuffle Along. To boost that relationship, Jack split the $3,000 in half and produced a second show for Saunders. When Bessie found out that he had spent her money on another woman's show, she finally let the marriage go. While 1929 was off to a bad start as far as Bessie's personal life was concerned, her career was still on track, but that too was about to change. Sales of blues records were down, but she seemed impervious to the pinch of the shifting taste that was retiring many of her colleagues. The heyday of blues was clearly over, but Bessie's future looked good. Columbia renewed her contract for the 6th time, and on May 1st, 1929, she was offered a spot in Pansy, a Broadway show produced by Maceo Pinkard and scheduled to open at the Belmont Theater on May 14th. Although she would only sing 2 songs, Pinkard offered her star billing. Heading an all-black cast of unknown performers, she saw it as a perfect opportunity to widen her performing horizon at a time when her past theatrical environment seemed imperiled. Did you hear that? That was pitiful, Miles. Come here, baby. Do you need me to hold you? Okay. Gotta keep the cat happy. What are you doing? Say hi. Okay. Warned you guys. Okay. Let's see. The 11th hour call should have served as a warning that all was not well. Indeed, it wasn't. 6 principal cast members walked out at the last minute, replaced by recruits who had not attended the rehearsals, and the costumes were delivered after the curtain went up. Yikes. New York's top theater critics were on hand, one observing that it was as if the dancers were meeting each other for the first time on stage. Some were. Only Bessie received good notices, Richard Lockridge of The Sun calling her appearance one momentary interlude of professionalism. In the Evening Post, Willa Waldorf noted that Bessie, a rather weighty personage of great good humor, sang her song over and over and over to wild applause, likewise executing sundry dance steps at intervals by way of variety. Is that the right page? Yeah, okay. 2 critics suggested that the audience kept Bessie singing in order to keep the rest of the cast from returning. Bessie finally announced that she was tired and too fat for this sort of thing anyhow. The show stumbled through 3 performances and closed. The day after the disastrous opening of Pansy, Bessie made what is probably the definitive version of Nobody Knows You When You're Down and Out, one of her most poignant recordings. Bessie made another career aside that summer when W.C. Handy recommended her to director Dudley Murphy for the starring role in St. Louis Blues, a 17-minute talkie that frames the title song in a thin plot. The only existing film footage of Bessie, it shows her acting and singing the classic blues tune with a large orchestra and chorus in a musical setting unlike any Columbia had given her. The film ran in black theaters, but seemingly had no impact on Bessie's professional life, which had long since leveled off and was now in decline. Bessie's sagging professional life is commonly attributed to her drinking, but she was also a victim of shifting public taste, talking pictures, and the Depression. On the 4th of July weekend in 1930, Bessie was given bottom billing at Harlem's Apollo, then still a Yiddish burlesque theater looking for a new audience. Pinched by the Depression, Columbia now paid her only $125 per selection and, unlike in previous years, recorded no more than her contract called for. By the summer of 1931, the TOBA circuit had folded and Columbia was dropping Bessie from a dwindling roster of artists. On the other hand, her personal life took a turn for the better when she became romantically involved with an old friend, Richard Morgan, whose successful bootlegging operation had been wiped out by repeal of the Volstead Act. Richard, who was Lionel Hampton's uncle, now toured with Bessie, but the glitter days were over. In 1933, John Hammond brought Bessie back into a recording studio to make 4 sides for OK, with pianist Buck Washington and a formidable band that included trumpeter Frankie Newton and tenor saxophonist Chu Berry. This group, modern by the day's standards, obviously suited Bessie, who had just begun the process of bringing her act up to date. She was in rare form, belting out "Give Me a Pigfoot and a Bottle of Beer," a rousing song that would become one of her best-known recordings. Barely perceptible in the background is Benny Goodman, who dropped in from an Ethel Water estate next door. It was Bessie's final recording session, and it ended with "Down in the Dumps," but her career had reached its nadir, and things were beginning to look up. As she stepped into the swing era, Bessie changed her repertoire to include such Tin Pan Alley material as "Smoke Gets in Your Eyes" and "Tea for Two." She also shed the wigs and feathers for a sleeker, more elegant look of satin evening gowns and swept-back hair. This is how she appeared at the Apollo, which now catered exclusively to black patrons. In 1936, Bessie found a new audience as a last-minute replacement for Billie Holiday at Connie's Inn, a Harlem club that had relocated to Midtown Manhattan. She also made an impromptu appearance on 52nd Street, dropping in during a jam session at the famous store. "I feel as though I am on the brink of new successes," she told the Chicago Defender's Alan McMillan in her 7th week at Connie's Inn. Indeed, her career had appeared to be on the upswing. Lionel Hampton had plans to include her in his series of small band swing recordings for Victor. John Hammond wanted her to cut some sides with members of the Bessie band, and another film was planned. It was in this atmosphere of optimism that Bessie and Richard Morgan left to join Winstead's Broadway Rastus show in Memphis. On September 26, 1937, after a successful series of performances in the Memphis area, they headed for Clarksdale, Mississippi, planning to catch up with the show in Darling the following evening. Bessie's Packard headed south along Route 61 with Richard at the wheel and Bessie at his side. They had argued and now drove in silence on the dark road. Probably mesmerized by the long, straight stretch of road asphalt, Richard did not see a big truck until it was too late. In the ensuing collision, Bessie was thrown from the car, her right arm nearly severed, her body in shock from severe internal bleeding. She never regained consciousness, but died at Clarksdale's Afro-American Hospital a few hours later. Well, okay. Bessie Smith's artistry continues to inspire new generations of singers, extending her legacy well beyond her 160 or so recordings. She was cited as one of the 2 major influences of Billie Holiday, whose recording debut, by ironic coincidence, took place only 3 days after Bessie's final session in the very same studio. Several generations later, she became a source of inspiration for the rock singer Janis Joplin, who in 1970 showed her gratitude by sharing with another Smith fan, Juniata Green, the cost of a stone for Bessie's unmarked grave. "She showed me the air and taught me how to fill it," said Joplin, who herself died 2 months later. Oh, and that's the end of... Oh, wait. Yeah, that's the end of that chapter. Alright. So that was an article titled Bessie Smith, written by Chris Albertson. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. Just like the other video, I will upload this onto YouTube, and I will post the link below as soon as I do that. Thanks so much. Bye!